listening to the Adventuring Party for the first week of June 2020. This week, the party turned their monstrous compendiums to Tinder mode as we play a nice game of Kill, Marry, Fuck. Oh wait, we're an all-ages podcast. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and related gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Savage.
I'm Owen.
I'm Colin.
And I'm Shane.
Greetings, guests, friends, listeners, captive audience, whoever you may be. This week on the party, we're going to try a new format. We brainstormed a little bit and came up with a new idea called, I was told I needed to tone this down for Apple, Wed, Bed, Behead. And this is the Monster Manual edition. So this Wed, Bed, Behead episodes are where we get around the table and talk about our absolute go-to favourites of something, our special once in a blue moon but always a great fun version of something, and then our never want to see it again version of something. So you want to wed something, you want to keep it around your game all the time. Bed, it's a sexy one-night stand with a very special monster, and Behead is left on the chopping block, never to be used if you get your way. So we're gonna go and do everybody's Wed first, and we're looking at the Monsters Manual. So we're looking at monsters that appear in fantasy role-playing games, obviously, given the way we focus on it. D&D bent, but if there's something from, say, Pathfinder or one of the other stalwarts like Wolfrup or even maybe Cthulhu, feel free to chuck them in. Owen, who are you gonna wed?
One of my favourite monsters is actually type of monster is from Doomtown or Deadlands. It's the Servitor class of monster, because the Servitor class of monsters are typically humans that have been twisted by evil deeds into something kind of horrific and nasty and very powerful and dangerous. And my favourite part of them as monsters is that every Servitor has a unique weakness. And until you figure out what that weakness is, you can't kill them.
That's cool.
So the players can encounter them, they can fight them, they can put them down, but they're going to be back. They're going to keep getting back up like the Terminator until you find the way to actually kill it. Which often means doing a bit of research into who this Servitor was before they became a Servitor. What's their backstory? Like, how do we get them? And like, they can have appallingly specific weaknesses. Like, for example, the hanging judges were a band of 6 judges that unjustly executed people to gain their control of their lands. And the way you kill them is you have a duly appointed lawman hang them, and that kills them. And or like one of the big bad guys is Setting Stone. His weakness is he can only be killed by bullets fired from guns in his own hands. That's it.
Excellent.
So yeah, you have to find ways of doing. Kind of in some cases that this seems pretty tricky, but they're a puzzle to be solved. In addition to being a threat, you can't just hit them harder with your axe. That's not going to kill them. They'll come back from that. So you need to come up with a different plan to deal with them. So the players have to engage with the setting, that to figure out the backstory, and then they can kill the monster. It's a bit like dealing with a specific supernatural thing in Supernatural, the TV show. It's like, well, you need to figure out how you kill a ghost or how you kill a demon. You can't just say, I killed a demon. It's not that easy. It
really is an excellent idea. And I like that they come with a mini investigation attached and a sort of a mini boss aspect to them.
Absolutely.
Okay, Colin, who are you wedding? Who are you taking up the aisle?
I would probably end up going with something sort of similar. I'm a huge fan of a good end of campaign boss fight. When we're talking about, anything closely attached to the Monster Manual, you're talking about sort of high fantasy adventure, and you want to build up to that huge, big, final epic conflict that saves the world. So my wed is going to be that boss fight, and what I'm looking for that is something that, in a similar way to your judges their own, you want something that they need to work towards, they need to plan and plot towards. I think the Tarrasque is a good example of that, in that, you don't just deal with the Tarrasque. You don't just go, oh, look, there's a Tarrasque, we better fight it and kill it. You have to plan, you have to build up, you have to make sure that you've got some way of casting the wish to keep the thing down when you finally do flatten it. So yeah, that kind of boss fight where you've got to build, you've got to plan, and then the fight itself is against this big guy who you have been chasing towards. He's got his own name. He's got his own weaknesses and strengths that you've got to have a tactic ready for. So yeah, there you go. It's the culmination to the campaign. That is the monster that I want to wed. I want to live happily ever after with my live happily ever after of the campaign. That's
it. Shane, have you got a sweetheart, someone that you're hoping to tie the knot with?
I feel like I've been I might have not going quite as grandiose as Colin or Eoin, but I spent a time thinking about this, and I flicked through the monster manual to find something that stood out to me, and then I realized that I'm a big fan of the Oni, or Ogre Mage. The name has switched back a few times over the years. I prefer to use the term Ogre Mage because Oni is a specific thing. The thing about the Ogre Mage is that they can sort of do everything. They've got a very, like, on paper, like, the Ogre Mage makes no sense. It has a couple of spells, it has swords, it changes. It's just like, oh, how did this monster come to be? Where is this giant blue man with all these random powers? Where did he come from? So, if you're looking for something cohesive and part of your setting's backstory, this maybe isn't the one for you. But as a villain, he's just so the Ogre Mage is just so flexible, just so, because he can do everything. He can be an intrigue adventure. He's been polymorphed. He polymorphs himself so that he looks like whatever. He, the halfling serving drinks at the bar, secretly an Ogre Mage. If you want a magical jewel, he has spells there, and there's nothing to say that you can't change up the spells to say this is a sneakier Ogre Mage or this is a blastier Ogre Mage. So you give some different spells. And he can fight with the best of them. So yeah, if you wanted just a big giant guy to have a big sword fight with your barbarian, that he does that too. And he has enough tricks up his sleeve that he can survive. He can fly away, he can turn to gas, and he can regenerate. So even if he's badly wounded, he can come back later in your dungeon to bedevil your party again. So it's just this whole... So even though, in terms of verisimilitude, he might not have the, a good reason to exist, as a mechanical opponent, I just find the sheer flexibility just really useful to have in a bad guy. It's just like, he's a Swiss Army knife opponent, and that's just very useful for a GM who needs a reactive bad guy, as it were.
He sounds absolutely dreamy. The full package.
Yeah,
So,
big.
That's a great
You
one.
can get lost in those, yellow, soulless eyes, and just, and he just flashes you those jet black teeth and a grin. Oh, he's in there like Flynn.
Okay, well, I can't. I'm not quite as specific as that. There's not just one Mr. Right for me. I like the Sultans of Old. I'm going to choose to wed a fairly harem of monsters, in that I'm going to pick an entire class, more or less, in the form of the good old undead. I think specifically the corporeal undead. I think there's just absolutely... I mean, there's nothing you can't do with a gaggle of zombies or a vampire as your big bad boss at the end of a campaign. I love the undead because they are such a useful tool. They come in all shapes and sizes. And I think the thing I like most about them is that quite apart from the ones you'll find outlined in the Monsters Manual, you can take almost anything that is alive in D&D, kill it, and bring it back to life as something undead, and then put a bit of a twist on it. So, while a skeleton or zombie is simply an undead humanoid, what does an undead centaur do? What would an undead unicorn be like? How about an undead rock? Some of the major creatures do get this treatment, like dragons, but there's still plenty of meat on the table, despoiled meat, the table's a rotting carcass, for a GM to take almost anything out of the Monsters Manual and kind of fiddle with it a bit and make it either a zombified or undead or vampiric or ghast-like version of its former self. So that's, I think there's lots of opportunities there to have fun, and I think it's everybody here has played a campaign where the undead show up, and they have their obvious strengths and weaknesses, but they're such a foundational part of putting together, a kind of an opposition for low level right up to high level players. That they're definitely the ones I want to take home to meet mom and dad. Okay, so that was Wed. We'll move on to Bed. The one night stands, the ones you're definitely. Is it flick right or left on Tinder? I don't know. Tinder was after my time. So, Eoin, who are you betting?
I have a deep abiding fondness for the person with secret powers. The bad guy or opposition that was there all along and was concealing their abilities until later. And you get to so it means you get to meet them earlier in the campaign. You get to banter with them a bit as a party. They're not a threat. They're not hostile. But then later on, you get to fight them, and all of a sudden they get these terrible secret powers which they weren't telling you about. Awesome. Because it gives you something you can mess with the players constantly, because the bad guy can be there doing stuff, and their players are like, oh, who's doing all this stuff? And slowly figure it out and realize, oh, this person was the bad guy along. So I have a huge fondness for that as an archetype. The bad guy you didn't know was there, and the secret powers bit is good because, hey, maybe she was only, a slight slip of a 15-year-old girl. However, she has a sword that raises the dead around her and tremendous sorcerer's powers, so, she's going to be a bit of a tough fight because of that. And,
I think I've met her.
You've basically...
Yeah, some people have.
Yeah, she's the nerdy girl in school who turns out to be secretly hot. That's or
in this case, secretly a necromancer. But whatever you're having yourself,
Necromancy's so hot right now. Okay, Colin, who are you meeting in the bar tonight?
My one night stand is going to be with cavalry, which I think are such a fitting piece to add into any typical fantasy world where your technology level is medieval-esque, and the notion of getting on a horse to do your fighting makes just a world of sense. Cavalry is an enormously powerful combat tool, and it is criminally underused in every form of D&D or related game because the mechanics rarely support it very well. The setting and stories you're telling are often, literally you're down in the dungeon, and if you get on a horse, you're going to concuss yourself. But I think they're a wonderful thing to add in when you can. And I know lots of people will have sat down when they're building their paladin and looked at all of the feats for mounted combat or whatever it is and gone, wow, man, anytime I get to ride my horse and smash a lance through somebody, I'm amazing. And that almost never happens. And you want to give people those opportunities. And it can be a great way of spicing up what might otherwise be a fairly mundane encounter. If your band of heroes are like, okay, there's some kobolds have been raiding caravans near here. Well, they're only kobolds. We'll go and deal with them. And then they find themselves out on an open grassy plain, and it turns out that the kobolds are riding velociraptors and have good ranged attacks. And suddenly you have, this elite team of foot soldiers against light skirmishing archer cavalry, and we'll have to struggle to pin them down. We'll have to deal with their maneuverability. We'll have to deal with the fact that when you do close with them, a velociraptor tries to eat your face. Because the combat power of the mount itself is another complication. It's another thing. So I think cavalry, it's one of those things where when you get to use it, it can be tremendously fun. It can be very cool. The thundering of hooves and the dipping of lances as the heavy cavalry charges in to combat it's kind of iconic in terms of the medieval image. And we just don't get to use it that often. And realistically, I have to agree with that, Paladin. If you build your character for mounted combat as a specialist mounted fighter in the typical D&D game, you're doing yourself a disservice because you will very, very rarely get to do enough fighting from horseback to make it worthwhile. So that is why it's my one-night stand. That is my bed.
So entirely engaging with the format of the show, you're picking a ride for your one-night stand.
Yes.
So moving on from Colin's lovely horse, Shane, who are you dropping the hand on and giving the glad eye to?
I would say my choice for this is the Shadow in the D&D sense, and similar, what I would call alternate attack monsters. The thing about the Shadow is that it does very little damage to a character's hit points. What they do instead is that they drain your strength score, and this is a interesting trick to use occasionally. The idea that what you thought was your invulnerable pile of hit points suddenly getting whittled away, and it's also draining your combat ability. It's an interesting trick to have a monster do occasionally. But I definitely don't think it's something you want to be using regularly, because, players signed up to play in a game with hit points and they put, 17 in their constitution because they wanted to have a lot of hit points. But it is never always wrong to attack a different part of the character sheet. I may be thinking a little bit in OSR terms here. But definitely having something that, drains your constitution score, or steals your hit dice, or, attacks your skills somehow. This is something fine to have as a sometimes monster. The Shadow in particular is sort of infamous for this because it's always worked slightly differently, but also it has the ability to, if it kills someone with the strength drain, they come back as another Shadow. This has sort of led to my Necromancer summons one Shadow in the middle of a village, and I depopulate this entire county. Because shadows eat shadows make shadows. So this is why you don't want to be, the Shadow should be a thing of the dungeon. It is literally, you have gone into the darkness, and the darkness is chewing on your protein. So it's not something that should be like a major part of the world, but as a trick to make remind the players that their giant ball of hit points in the AC isn't always going to save them. It's something to have.
Absolutely. I was looking at them not so long ago, actually, and they are CR rating 1/8. So in theory, you can throw an absolute Gansy load of them at a character.
Note to GMs: do not do this unless you have clerics in the party.
I think there's lots of potential for a swarm of shadows. But what you're doing in the shadows, Shane, will remain your own business. But I think that's an absolutely excellent choice, the shadow. My own is somewhat similar in that it works on obfuscation as part of its charm. So my own bed is the many-pawed, multi-tentacled monstrosity. This is the Displacer Beast, also known as sort of guttural throat-clearing dir-whatnow. That come out of the Feywild. I think they were bred originally by the Unseelie Court. But Displacer Beasts, for those who aren't familiar, you poor souls, are basically a 6-legged panther that also have 2 lashing spined tentacle whips that emerge from their foremost shoulders. They're classic D&D monster, and they've shown up here and there. They're on probably most notably in one of the D&D arcade games called Dungeons & Dragons Chronicles of Mystara, where I think they were the end-of-level boss for the first level. So probably the only end-of-level boss you'd see before chewing through all your 50p pieces back in the mid-90s. Displacer Beasts are a fairly low-level threat. They're like challenge rating 3, and you're only really going to encounter them occasionally. They're great sort of guard dogs. They're great companions for a nemesis that might show up, lazily petting one before directing it to kill somebody. But they're also fairly intelligent. Intelligence 6 means that they can come up with their own sort of plans and short-term goals.
I believe in original D&D, Displacer Beasts had a language and also a weird vendetta against blink dogs.
Well, blink dogs were created to get rid of them. They're the Displacer Beasts are the original fly that was swallowed by the old woman, and blink dogs were generated as a means of displacing them, essentially. Displacer Beasts, of course, the name refers to the fact that they are able to basically appear to be adjacent to where they're actually standing, which is their trick, which means they're slightly harder to hit than a CR3 monster at the same level. They're also, they bounce between being sort of no alignment and lawful evil, which means that they have a tendency, they're not quite just the savage beast. They will kill for sport. They will toy with their victims, and their ability to sort of appear to be somewhere that they're not, I think, is something a GM can do quite a bit with if you've got characters who like to rush into the fight. This Displacer Beast might have decided to place his apparent location over a concealed drop or some other environmental hazard. So you can have some fun with that as your party attempt to pin them down and beat them to death. But yeah, they're not for everyday use. I think they're a wonderful sort of stalking hunter in the dark, a la Alien from the Ridley Scott movie, for a low-level party. And later on, you can kind of employ them as guard dogs and things like that. So they are my bed option. And they're sleek and sexy looking. Well-designed creature, which obviously I have a sort of particular love of. Well, that gets us into the very last leg of this three-legged stool, which is Behead. A creature or a type of creature or a monster that you simply are sick to the back teeth of. Eoin, who are you beheading?
My pick is the Accidental TPK machine, which is any creature that's got some sort of stun or paralysis that lasts a minute or maybe even more. It could be an hour, it could be 10 minutes, it could be a day on a regular attack, and can accidentally wipe your party if you put the wrong number of them up against them. I'll give you an example of one from Age of Worms, when we were at 19th level, and we were heading down into what we didn't know was a place where one of the keys we needed to find were. But the key was inside a carrion crawler. And this was not a regular carrion crawler, this was a Kaiju carrion crawler, a CR20 threat. So we walk into this cavern full of fungus, and we go, where the feck is it? It immediately erupts from the ground and rolls initiative. So this thing has AC 41, which is fine. That's decent AC at level 19. You'll hit that fairly easy. It's got 623 hit points, so you're not going to take it down that fast. So we put some damage into it, and it then, we tried to hit it with a mind control spell. It's immune to mind affecting, whatever. Then it gets to go. And it stretches out 8 tentacles and attacks us at plus 30 each. I got 2, one of them missed me. And at plus 30, it pretty reliably hit the whole party. It had reach of 40 feet. So you wouldn't easily get out of the shape of the cavern. It hit them, and we're like, okay, what happens now? And John said, all right, well, give me a DC 41 fortitude save. And I was like, 41? My character had about plus 20-something to fortitude. Everyone else was way less. And I was like, okay, I rolled a 20, so I saved. Everybody else was paralyzed for 7 rounds. And I was like, This thing is going to kill us all in that time. I activated a power that made me immune to paralysis and hacked it to death. If I didn't have that power, everybody was dead. And that can happen at the ghoul level. If you're fighting ghoul, if you sick 5 ghouls in your party early on in D&D, and they're like, oh, you failed the save. Well, you're paralyzed for a minute. What? You're paralyzed for a minute. That is 10 rounds in today's money. Okay, that's not super great. And if, like, 4 of your party fail that, you suddenly got 1 party member fighting against 5 ghouls, and they can keep trying to paralyze you by just hitting you. So actual accidental TPK machines like that, and the KG Carrion Crawler was my big example of one. But like, it happens with ghouls all the time, and ghouls is specific stuff that people warn them about. Don't put too many up against your players, or they'll all die.
Or you could be like 5th edition and specifically call out that they hunt in packs.
Yeah. Oh, look. Anyway, but that's my pick for bad monster.
All right, yeah, good one there. Because like 10 or 7 rounds, whatever. That's an eternity on the table.
Yes.
Your fight is over. Colin,
you can go get a cup of tea.
So Colin, who are you getting rid of? Who's going in the dump bin?
Right into the dump. I'm going to go for the D&D 4th Ed category of monster called the Brute. And if you're not familiar with the Brute, it was a variant on whatever your monster was, which did a little bit less damage, and basically they just doubled the hit points. And that was it. And the purpose of these creatures was to have something in the fight that could just absorb damage and be somewhat of a threat, but not really. And it was just such bad, lazy game design because it was so boring. All brutes did were make fights last longer. That was literally it. And there were so many times you'd have your fight in D&D 4th Ed where the party would engage with the enemy and they'd lash out their damage and do whatever they were doing, and then most of the enemy would be dead, and then there was still this brute or 2 brutes standing there with half or more of their hit points remaining. And it was literally just a case of, okay, these guys can do virtually nothing to you, and it's going to take you another 3 rounds of combat just to slowly hack them down. So those guys, they can get in the sea. They are to me emblematic of the biggest problems that 4th Ed had. And yeah, there are better ways of making your fights be interesting than just giving everybody double hit points.
Amen. Shane, who's going to get to talk to the hand?
I have a very specific one here, which is the Ice Devil. For people who don't know, this is the Galugon, a bug-like devil from one of the frozen hells. I'm not sure which one is. I don't want to mix up my devil lords right now. This is more specifically a problem I had with them in 3rd edition, because multiple times in my own campaigns and in campaigns I was playing in, I saw this happen, where the DM needed a outsider about CR9, so picked out the Galugon, and people would go, "What's that?" I roll my Knowledge Arcana. Ah, it is a Ice Devil. Ah, it will have ice powers, and we must fight it with fire. And this was the point where they would start throwing fireballs on it, and the GM would look at the monster stat block and go, "Huh, the Ice Devil is immune to fire, but merely resistant to ice." And it's just like, this. I saw this happen multiple times. It's like, what? Thankfully, they have... The only thing they've done in 5th Ed is they have made it immune to both fire and ice. But I feel like this is sort of a thing where, because of the layering of immunities upon devils and devil kind, and the sort of racial immunity to fire that they have to have or you're not a devil, that they have made what should be a relatively intuitive monster unintuitive. And frankly, I think going forward, if I ever am forced by some adventure to have one of these things come again, I will call it a Gelugon, and I will not mention the whole Ice Devil thing because that's just confusing and it's really weird when you have to read out, no, immune to fire, your obvious stroke of genius has been for naught. So that's my the Ice Devil and unintuitive monster weaknesses.
Okay, so it's kind of saying it's one thing and not another. So in the bin it goes. Well, my Behead, ironically, is a creature that doesn't actually have a body. It's all head, and it's another classic deity, the Beholder. Usually encountered sort of mid-tier because they're fairly dangerous, but Beholders are sort of the ultimate sort of neg lords in that they have this massive sort of anti-magic cone that they project in front of them, 150 feet. So if they're looking at you, you don't get to use all of your cool magic items or spells that you can whiz pop at them. But of course, they famously have a whole bunch of eye stalks that shoot magic at you. And there's like 12 of them, and they're all going to sort of target different things. And a round of combat with this thing is going to take forever. And as a 5th ed, they usually have the legendary monsters as well. So they're going to get to do some stuff every time you act as well. Frankly, I think the reason the main reason I'm putting them in the Behead category though is that they're ugly. They look like a bunch of Chupa Chup lollipops jammed into a Halloween pumpkin carved by a not particularly talented 5-year-old. They're just horrible, sort of stupid design. They don't come from anywhere. I think they dream each other into existence or something dumb like that.
Yeah, they used to have like a Spelljammer. They had there's there's these Beholder mothers. There's like this pillar of flesh and eyes, just kind of vomits forth new ones. But now they've decided that they're basically avatars of madness or something. They're weird, and no one has ever really hammered down, what they are, other than the fact that they are one of the really iconic monsters, and therefore they have to be kept around.
Yeah, well, The Simpsons and the D&D movie have just made them look sort of goofy, so they go in the bin for me. And so if I could find something to behead on them, I would. I guess I'll just have to content myself with plucking the eye stalks off them and consigning them to the never again pile. Okay, well, that has been our Wed Bed Behead episode on fantasy creatures. If you've got a few choices of your own, be sure to drop us a line or show up on the Discord to discuss this week's episode. You find links in the show notes below. But for now, having settled down, put our exes behind us, and finally figured out that they were just toxic, I'm going to say that this party's over.
Thanks for listening to the Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account @AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. The host can be contacted directly at Eoin, Savage, or scar@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, or you'd like to talk to special guest Colin, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.